Okay, hello everybody. My name is Domenic, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about my summer at the Environmental Defense Fund, where I learned how to approach climate communication. Okay, so just to give some background on my position specifically, to give context to the rest of my presentation, I'll just go over some logistics really quickly. So I was obviously a communication intern, and I was working out of DC in a hybrid setting, which was very helpful because I could meet with my supervisor on at least a weekly basis to kind of like clarify certain questions I had about my assignments. So that was really cool. And I was working specifically for the legal and regulatory team. So my supervisor was the communication director for that specific team. And I had the goal of combating misinformation targeting electric vehicles through various communication strategies using theories we learned last semester and also ones that I learned while at EDF. So some common assignments that I had were webpage updates. So this is very important in maintaining EDF's credibility by keeping our web pages up to date with reports coming out and new relevant facts. We were able to show EDF was keeping up with these topics and to maintain that trust with our audience, which was the public. I also worked on press releases and editing those with my supervisor. So this mainly took the form of synthesizing pages upon pages of public comments written by lawyers in very technical jargon. It was very hard to understand into a one-page press release. So that was very good experience. I also wrote op-eds and blogs, which were more personal, just about like my experience at EDF and also kind of the work I was doing and why it's important and relevant. And the majority of my work was research. And through this research, I was able to give myself an overview of all of the conversations being had about electric vehicles to kind of figure out what arguments are being made for electric vehicles and also which ones are being made against, which was the more important part, which I'll get to a little bit later. So through this research, I was able to learn a few things, as you can imagine, about EVs. So I'm going to share those really quickly with you. So one thing about EVs is that they're going to strengthen the grid. So it's actually really cool. You can plug EVs back into a charger and sell electricity into the grid to kind of level out demand when it gets really high so the system doesn't become overwhelmed. They also improve air quality. So think about areas where there's a lot of traffic, so urban settings. Because EVs don't have tailpipe emissions, they're very good at reducing urban smog, which not only improves air quality, it's also really beneficial for people's health. They save people money, so filling up your car with electricity instead of gas is a lot cheaper. Upfront costs still remain an issue, but it is important to remember that it's a fairly new technology. If you compare it with like gasoline cars, they've been around for over a century. These have been around for maybe over 2 decades approximately, so given more time, those financial barriers will lessen. They reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So over the lifetime of the vehicle, they produce less emissions than gas ones, so they're better for the environment. And they create new jobs, which is also really cool. Think about like the Tesla gigafactories in Texas and also Nevada, which have created, in Texas alone, like 12,000 jobs. Not only the jobs in-house, which are like assembly line, putting the cars together, and also like the software engineers, the people making the code that's then inputted into the computers to drive the technology, but also the construction jobs that were made to kind of build these massive sites. And so I used these kind of points after my research to develop and kind of create communication content in the forms that I talked about earlier, so like blog posts, press releases, things of that nature. And so through this process of like condensing information, compiling it, synthesizing and molding it a certain way to cater to certain arguments, I was able to learn a few things. Move this way? No? Okay.
I think you have to point it at that.
This thing? Okay. And I'll just go like this. Okay, so as I was saying, I was able to have some like communication takeaways from this process of changing the information into a more digestible format. So I've learned the importance of maintaining transparency with an audience, whoever it may be, because without that trust that you can create through transparency, then your communication message is not going to be received by your audience. It's also important to focus on like the education part of your communication strategy. For me and my supervisor were really trying to emphasize just focusing on the information aspects that we're trying to get the public to absorb. And because, if you address the misinformed arguments, you're in a sense legitimizing them because you're addressing them in the first place, so people might think, they're valid in some way or another. And it's also very important to only use intentional language. I feel like this was as Chris was mentioning, intentional language is like a really hard skill to use, especially coming from such an academic writing focused major like ENS, where we're constantly met with a prompt and then also following that like a word requirement, where like even after we fulfilled the question the prompt provides us, we put in a lot of filler just to meet that word count, which is unnecessary. And we also use a lot of technical jargon because our audiences are professors or like a grad TA who can understand this. So trimming down that fat like we learned in class, but applying it to a real world setting was a really cool thing that I did at EDF. So working with like a climate communication strategy, politics are involved, obviously. So me and my supervisor tried really hard to take away any political bias in our work, because once you let that slip into your communication and your writing, you almost automatically cut half of your audience off from the public, and that demographic is usually the people you're trying to target with climate communication. So just trying to stick with the facts is crucial. And also learning your audience. I know this seems like intuitive, but especially specifically for my project, it was really important to kind of understand the conversations being had, like I mentioned, so then I can target various counter arguments, right, and isolate those ones that have standing and kind of tailor my communication strategies towards them. So this not only made me more efficient as a communicator, but it made those efforts more efficient. And so some like bigger themes that I took from this that weren't necessarily communication focused, that I can apply to like a future career that has to do with the environment in some capacity, is that it's important not to focus on finding a perfect solution for environmental problems. I remember at the beginning of my internship being like slightly frustrated at the work I was doing, I'll be honest, but because I thought I could do more. I felt like combating misinformation was like such a small aspect of solving climate change, and I felt like I could do more. But expressing these concerns to my supervisor and also like other staff at EDF, I was quickly reminded that it's not possible to find this perfect solution, the silver bullet in such a complex, and solving such a complex issue doesn't exist, and that it's actually more important to focus on finding that puzzle to solve the piece of the puzzle to solve the climate crisis, other way. And it's also important to remind ourselves that if it's not us doing this work, then who? I feel like as young people that are really educated and we're learning about environmental communication, we have like a responsibility to provide a cleaner and safer planet, not only for ourselves, but also future generations. And that's all. Thank you so much for listening.